Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Did you know that your body can actually be either a sugar burner or a fat burner? On this podcast, we talk all about how to make your body a fat-burning, fat-fueled machine and engaging your full metabolic flexibility. I'm Vanessa Spina. I am a sport nutrition specialist, a biomedical science student at U of T, and I am the author of the best-selling cookbook Keto Essentials, available on Amazon, and creator of the Ketogenic Girl Challenge program. And I am obsessed with optimizing our health through all these different biohacks, ketogenesis, intermittent fasting, all of these amazing tools that center around making the body a fat-adapted, fat-fueled machine. With this in mind, I present interviews to you with biomedical scientists, physicians, and people from all around the world who have experienced remarkable results from following a low-carb or ketogenic diet and getting their body into ketogenesis. So I hope you guys enjoyed these interviews with this goal in mind. Hey friends, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here with me today. We're going to talk all about food addiction and recovery from that, and how to trust food again and be able to eat food in a way that you know that you can trust it to nourish you without feeling out of control around it. And I want to talk about one aspect in particular that really shifted things for me and really helped me in my journey in overcoming food addiction and just being able to trust food and love food for what it is. It's our friend, it's our ally, it makes our bodies strong, and it keeps our bodies really well fueled. And there was one really huge shift for me, and I want to talk about that on today's episode. On this podcast, we talk a lot about optimizing our bodies for wellness, and along with that goes balancing our hormones. There are so many different hormones that play in our body, and one of the most important ones is cortisol. Now, one of the things that I recently learned is how much the impact of artificial light plays on our hormones and can create disruption in our hormones. It can create too much cortisol in our bodies if we are getting too much artificial light coming in through our screens, which a lot of us, much like myself, are on for a large part of the day. I recently learned about this amazing company called BLUBLOX. That's BLUBLOX. BLUBLOX have 3 types of lenses that offer complete light protection from day to night. Evidence-based, really stylish looking products that actually improve our lives. They launched 3 signature glasses. They have Sleep Plus, Summer Glow, and Blue Light, and they also have a Remedy sleep mask. I recently had the opportunity to interview their founder, Andy Mant, on the show, and we had such a fascinating discussion about circadian rhythms, about hormonal balance and function, and how getting a lot of exposure to blue light can really disrupt our hormones by generating too much cortisol, which can lead to higher blood glucose, poorer sleep, not getting all that restorative deep sleep and repair that happens at night because we're not getting enough melatonin. I really love using their glasses. I've started using them in the evening when I'm working late, and it really makes a huge difference. Plus the glasses are really stylish looking and chic. You gotta go check them out. They offer non-prescription, prescription, and reader's glasses, and you can even send them your own favorite frames to have their world-class lenses installed into them. Now, what's really cool too is that every pair of glasses that BLUBLOX sells, they will donate a pair of reading glasses to the charity Restoring Vision. Now, Andy is generously offering 15% off to listeners of Fast Keto. If you go to BLUBLOX.com and use the code FASTKETO, that link is BLUBLOX, BLUBLOX.com. Go check them out. Let me know if you try them, and I would love to hear your results. All right, guys. So this episode is all about a major shift that I had in my recovery from food addiction, and something that really started to dawn on me in the last few months and really crystallized recently. And I used to always feel like I had no control over foods, especially carbs. I had no control over carbs. I used to eat a very high carb diet, and for most of my adult life, I was vegetarian, so I really relied on carbs to fuel me, to fill me up. I avoided fat quite a bit. I avoided protein because I was vegetarian, and I never understood why I never felt full. It didn't matter how much I ate in the day. At the end of the day, I was still eating ice cream in front of the TV at the end of the night, and the only thing that stopped me was that eventually that tub of ice cream would be empty. And I could have had more if we had more, and I had to just rationalize, like, you can't eat more than, one whole tub of ice cream. Like, I would have these lines that I would draw, and I never felt fully satisfied or satiated. I always felt like if I stopped eating in the evening, that I was somehow having to exercise willpower to not eat more. And during the day, anytime I wasn't eating, I felt like I was exercising willpower to not go and eat or snack. I finally understand why, and it's really thanks to the work of Dr. Ted Naiman. You probably know him if you're in our community or this low-carb space, and you've probably seen some of his amazing infographics. And one of the things that he really explained in bringing out a lot of studies from Simpson et al.'s research in Australia and some other scientists, and his theory of the protein leverage hypothesis, which is basically that we overeat energy in order to get our protein needs met. Basically, because protein is an essential macronutrient, and it is the main one because there are 9 essential amino acids that we have to get from outside sources, the whole idea of this protein leverage hypothesis is that we tend to overeat food because we're trying to get our protein needs met, and in that process, we end up overeating energy, so carbs and fats, just because along with some of those carbs and fats, there's going to be some protein. I know that this resonated so hard for me because as a vegetarian, most of the foods that I was eating were energy. They weren't protein, but there would be some protein that would come with it. So there'd be like a little bit of protein in the salad dressing that I would have on my giant salads. There would be a little bit of protein in some of those, a few nuts that I would snack on. There would be a little bit of protein in that ice cream. There would be a little bit of protein in all of these high carb meals that I was eating. And I was feeling so unsatiated and so unsatisfied because I wasn't meeting my protein needs. And as a vegetarian who barely ate any protein at all, I think my protein sources were like chickpeas and hummus. And, for a time I was raw vegan, and I was a fruitarian and raw vegan. I really didn't have any protein at all for many, many years. I was just surviving without any protein at all. And, there was trace protein. There's trace protein in cucumbers and, all of those vegetables and things that I was juicing. But for so long, I always felt starving, and I was stuffing my body full of food, full of high carb foods, just hoping that if I filled it with enough food, enough volume, that I would feel full. But the fundamental missing element was protein and some essential fats. But the main one really was protein. And because I wasn't getting enough protein, I went to bed every night feeling hungry and starving, even though my stomach was absolutely full. And it's so simple now, and it makes so much sense now that I understand this principle of overeating energy. And you look at so much of the modern food that we have today is convenience-based food, and so much of it is really lacking in protein. You look at the model of most junk food, if you look at pizza, sandwiches, burgers, and fries, it's always the same model. It's always high carb, high fat, small amount of protein. High carb, high fat, small amount of protein. So high energy, low protein. And that's pretty much what I was eating all the time. And, wondering why I was feeling hungry all the time. Now that I know and understand this information, it makes so much sense. It seems so simple. I almost laugh at how simple it is. But it took me a really long time to grasp this concept that we will overeat energy until we get our protein needs met. And when you flip that model around and you prioritize protein first, you get your protein needs met and you don't have to overeat anymore. It's the end of overeating energy. And it is so beautifully simple, so logical, and it makes so much sense when you understand nutritional biochemistry and how we have these essential macronutrients, we have these essential amino acids and fatty acids we have to get, but the amount of fatty acids we have to get is pretty minimal. Really, the main ones are the amino acids that our bodies cannot produce. We've lost the ability to make them ourselves over time, and we have to get them from external sources. And protein makes everything in our bodies, all the enzymes, all the hormones that are protein or peptide based, all of our muscle tissue, 50% of our bone is protein. Our hair is protein, our skin, our nails, everything is protein. Our whole bodies are protein, not just the tissue, but also all of these molecules that our body makes, so many hormones, so many enzymes, which are catalysts. They're all made from protein. So it's no wonder for me that I was starved of protein for most of my adult life from choosing to be a vegetarian, that I was overeating energy all the time and never feeling full. And I see it all around me now that I have this lens to see and analyze things in the world, and I see how many of us are overeating energy just to get our protein needs met. And it's amazing how much protein dilution there has been over time in our foods. And it is almost to the point where we have to overeat in order to meet that protein requirement, unless you go out of your way to prioritize protein. And by prioritizing protein, what I mean is when you prepare a meal, when you think of a meal, when you think of a snack, no matter what it is, when you think of your plate, the first thing that goes on the plate is the protein, and then you build around it. That's what I mean by prioritizing protein. Is a meal is not a meal if it doesn't have protein in it, and that is what our body needs more than anything. It doesn't mean that you can't snack on a salad without having any protein on it after your protein needs are met. So once you take care of your protein needs, it really, truly is the end of overeating. I guarantee it. And this is such a small but massively powerful shift if you've ever been anyone that's overeaten. Now, this also applies to binging. Binge eating behavior is a massive epidemic in our society. There's so much binge behavior, and it's not just binge eating, but binging that manifests itself in many different forms. But when it comes to binge eating, it's often stated that it comes from a lack and an overcompensation in the behavior from over restriction and missing nutrients that we need. And it makes so much sense that, especially if protein is being restricted and we're not getting enough protein in the daily diet, that would trigger binge eating behavior where your body is just overeating in one big sitting, just in one sitting, in order to try and get its protein needs met and try and recover that. But if you're trying to get your protein needs met and you're eating a lot of the modern processed foods that we have today, you're just going to have to eat so much. And usually you'll end up in a caloric surplus just by trying to meet your protein needs if you're eating a lot of processed foods. If you're eating a lot of whole foods and you're prioritizing protein, that's not going to be a problem. You're not going to be overeating, and you're not going to be in a situation where you are overeating energy just to get your essential nutrient needs met. And seriously, it's such a powerful shift. And I always thought of myself as an abstainer and not a moderator, and I didn't understand moderators. But I have to say that for myself, after now prioritizing protein for the last 2 years, I've now found myself being able to moderate certain foods I couldn't moderate before. And it's been a really cool experience. Like there are certain foods like nut butters and chocolate that I couldn't just have a piece. It's the same with like cheese. There's just certain foods where I couldn't have a piece of it. And when you look at it in this context, in this framework, if you're trying to get your protein needs met from eating chocolate, you have to eat a lot of chocolate to meet your protein needs. There's some protein in there, but there's way more fat. So if you're eating chocolate, you're going to overeat it if you haven't first met your protein needs, because you have to in order to get enough protein. There's a little bit of protein in it. With cheese, if you're eating most cheeses, which are high fat and low protein, if your body is really deprived of protein, like mine was when I was vegetarian, and my body's trying to overcompensate and get its protein needs met, I'm going to have to overeat that cheese. I'm going to have to eat like a pound of cheese in order to get my protein needs met. And in the process, I've overeaten all of this fat and all of this energy just to get the protein that my body needs. But if instead I have my protein needs met first, so I make sure at my meal that I have a big, nice piece of meat, a big piece of steak or fish or turkey or chicken or eggs, whatever it is, yogurt. If I make sure that I get that protein first, the temptation to want to overeat the cheese or the chocolate or nut butters, the same thing goes for nut butters. They're mostly fat, but there is some protein in it. It's not going to be there because the protein needs have been taken care of, so that need to overeat on those foods that have more energy than protein is going to be vastly diminished. And it's amazing what a difference it makes. And I feel like this has cracked the code of overeating for me. And for so many people, I just never understood how someone could take a bite of chocolate or a bite of cheese, or, some just like a small amount of nut butters and just have it and be totally satisfied. But those people were not starving of protein. They were having their protein needs met. And when you think of someone who is so depleted in protein and their body is crying out for it and starving for protein and those essential, amino acids, and that person's like eating salad all day long with salad dressing, barely getting any protein in, and then along comes some kind of food that has a small amount of protein in it, but a lot of energy, it's natural that it would be difficult to not overeat it. I'm not saying that every time I ate those foods, I went crazy, but I had the desire to. And that desire made me feel so bad about myself. Like it made me feel like I was worthless. I had no control. Why don't I have self-control? Why do I want to eat all this when other people can just have a piece and walk away? Like what's wrong with me that I'm still thinking about that chocolate or that cheese? Why can't I just get on with my life and like go and do other activities? Like I hated myself for being so fixated on those foods. And I hated myself that I couldn't just be normal like everyone else and just have a piece and be at peace with food. And now I truly understand why. And I truly understand why it was like that. And it's so freeing to understand that and know that it wasn't my fault. And that because I was depriving my body of what I needed, which was essential protein, I was overeating and it wasn't my fault. And I didn't have to hate myself. I didn't have to think of myself as, disgusting or just, a pig or all these things that I would say to myself that I wasn't even aware of. I actually have spoken before on the podcast about self-sabotage and inner monologue and inner dialogue and the importance of being aware of it. And I mentioned on one podcast that one day I was on the airplane and I was like, I'm just going to dialogue in my head and write down everything that I'm thinking. Every time I catch myself talking to myself, I'm just going to write it down and sort of journal a log of my inner dialogue. And the things that I was saying to myself were shocking. Like, they were things I would never say to anyone, not even someone that I hated. So it made me realize in that moment that I beyond hated myself. Like, I despised myself. And it was so unconscious for so long. And it wasn't until I started listening to the way I spoke to myself, I was just in shock. I was calling myself a pig and this and that. And I don't even know where that came from. Like, I think some of it came from some bullying that I experienced growing up, but that's just a part of life. Like, how many of us go through life without experiencing any kind of teasing or bullying? I mean, if you're the fat kid in school, like many of us were, like, you do experience more of it probably, but I just couldn't believe how badly I was speaking to myself. And I hated myself because I felt like I had this lack of control around food. And I now know that every day I was not getting my protein needs met. I was eating, when I was little, prioritizing candy on my plate, definitely not protein. My priority was getting candy and getting as much of it as I could every day. That was what I thought about all the time. And, eating potato chips, junk food, just overeating energy all day long in order to get that protein. And I didn't realize, like, I had to eat 4 or 5 slices of pizza to get that protein in because I wasn't getting it in the proper amounts. I should have been starting my day every day with eggs, maybe some beef too, but at least eggs. Starting my day with solid, healthy protein, having nice protein for lunch and for dinner. Instead, I was usually having cereal or bagels or toast for breakfast. Lunchtime, and there was always school snacks, but lunchtime I was usually having like chicken nuggets and fries, which we all know there isn't a lot of chicken in there. I was having, pizza sandwiches with peanut butter and jelly, just foods that didn't have a lot of protein in them. Usually had a snack after school, which I love to have, like peanut butter on toast or some kind of candy, potato chips, snacks. And then for dinner, I probably got the most amount of protein in the day. We'd have some kind of meal that revolved around a protein, but I wasn't getting enough. And I know that now because our recommended daily allowance, the RDA for protein, is very, very low, and it's 0.8 grams per kilogram. And someone told me the other day, I have to fact check this, but that number actually was determined during World War II when rationing was happening, and the UK wanted to make sure that everyone in the UK was getting enough meat to avoid disease if there was some kind of disease outbreak. And so they had to make sure that every single person got at least 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, just to avoid disease. And we've now taken that RDA as the absolute amount of protein we should have in a day, and we treat it like a maximum. I don't even think I was getting that much on most days. And I always went to bed, often thinking about snacking or having cookies after dinner. And I just never felt full really my whole life. And it's not until really keto, and especially the last 2 years, where I modified my ketogenic diet to really prioritize protein, that I finally felt full. And I've said this before in other episodes, but I had this feeling of fullness, like that feeling that I ever only got after Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving stuffed, when I realized Thanksgiving is the only time that I really allow myself to eat like all that meat. Like I'll have as much turkey as I want. And the rest of the year I always made sure to moderate it and not have too much. But at Thanksgiving, I usually had a lot of turkey and I'd always feel super stuffed. And it wasn't because of all the sides. It was because I was eating all that turkey. And obviously there's a lot of other food that comes with it, which made me feel extra stuffed. But I felt this sense of Thanksgiving stuffed, of fullness, but without that bloat, without that distension, without that discomfort, without this feeling of being like, oh, I ate way too much. Just like I ate just enough and I feel satisfied. And many of you may not be able to relate to this if you've never restricted protein, if you've never been vegetarian or vegan, or you've never really avoided protein in your life. But I think a lot of us do, because meat has really gotten such a bad reputation. We've been living in fear of fat, and most protein has fat in it. So we've been, throwing away egg yolks until recently, avoiding steak and red meat, mostly eating fish and poultry, and just making sure to not get too much of it. Probably because plain fish and poultry is not always the most exciting thing to eat, unlike, a burger or ribeye. I've noticed just such a huge difference in my levels of satiety, my ability to feel satisfied all the time and not think about food. But the biggest thing really has been the end of overeating for me, and knowing that I don't have to fear overeating anymore. Like it's just never going to be a problem for me, because I'm making sure that my essential needs are met every day, first and foremost. And that means my body's gotten all the protein it needs. I can have a piece of chocolate and be like, well, that was a nice treat. I can have a piece of cheese and just enjoy that nice piece of cheese without feeling like I have to eat the whole block. And, people talk about other addictive properties of, casein and casomorphins and these kinds of things in dairy, but I can have some dairy now and then feel good and feel satisfied and then just move on with my day. So that was definitely not the case for me ever before that. And so I just want to say, for anyone who thinks that they're just an abstainer, that may be the case for you, but it may also be the case that if you do prioritize your protein and your essential nutrients first, that you might find yourself being able to moderate things that you didn't think that you could before. So this has been such a cool realization and insight for me, and it's made a big difference for me in not only my addiction, my food addiction that I used to have, my recovery from food addiction, but also just releasing all of the guilt and the shame and the terrible feelings of self-hatred that I had for not feeling like I could ever control food, not understanding why I couldn't be like everyone else. And now I feel like I have full control of my food, but in an effortless way, not in a way where I'm trying to do something or I'm trying to fit in certain, numbers or macros or hit things. If anything, now I'm trying to make myself eat more, and it's much harder than I thought it would be. So I just want you guys to know that it doesn't mean it's necessarily set in stone. And, there's so much healing that happens on these kinds of elimination protocols. And I really, really enjoyed doing carnivore for the past couple of years. I think I personally needed to, after most of my life being vegetarian, in order to really replenish that protein and lean bone mass. And I can see a huge difference in myself in just a short amount of time. So I really think that it was really healing for me, especially eating all those collagen-rich meats, all the beef cheeks, all the pate. I really think it's been a healing protocol for me, and I'm still eating those foods all the time, but also bringing in more variety of foods and really enjoying that. And I don't feel any guilt, shame, or any fear. I don't feel any fear around those foods anymore, because I now understand that that kind of behavior where I felt I was never satisfied, it was a physiological response. It was not emotional for me. It was not some kind of lack in self-discipline or willpower or some kind of flaw in me. It was just a physiological need. So it's amazing when we can really understand the science behind these things. I'm so glad I went back to school, studied biochemistry and physiology, because it really helps me to understand these things. And of course, a big thank you to Dr. Ted Naiman, who really helped me realize this with all the work he's done in bringing out some of the research done on the protein leverage hypothesis, and his PE diet is really, really awesome. So big shout out to Dr. Ted Naiman. If you don't have his book, by the way, the PE diet, it is awesome. I had to order myself a physical copy because I love the book and all the beautiful graphics and illustrations that he puts in there. But he's just a fantastic doctor. And the fact that he's a medical doctor who's been practicing for about 30 years, but he's also an engineer, I think really put him in this special position to be able to understand and figure out what the solution to this overeating, obesity epidemic that we've been dealing with. And so much of it just comes down to feeling satisfied and not feeling hungry all the time. And that means getting the right amount of protein in every day. So thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope it provided some insight for you. I love doing these solo cast episodes for you guys, second part of the week. It's always fun to just sit down with you and know that I'm keeping you company, maybe on a walk, maybe while you're cooking, maybe while you're driving, no matter what it is that you're doing. I really love you guys. I really appreciate you all for listening. I love hearing from you and what your insights were on the episodes, how you like the episodes, what you want to hear more of, and who you'd like me to have on the show. So thank you guys so much for listening. And until the next episode, wishing you a fat-filled rest of your day. Make sure to check out ketogenicgirl.com if you want to check out any of the meal plans or coaching programs that I have available there. I would love to help you get the results that you want to see. So be sure to check that out at www.ketogenicgirl.com. All right, guys. Bye for now.
A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with a ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.